So, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. This is the latest project from Marvel Studios and from Marvel Animation in particular. As we know, they have launched a couple of different series on Disney Plus, such as What If, which just wrapped up its run, as well as the critically acclaimed show X-Men '97, which we reviewed last year. I know a show we both really, really enjoyed and love, and made both of our top 10 lists for 2024. And now your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man has arrived, and this is a bit different from the MCU because this
Yeah.
Spider-Man, the story that they're telling with this show, it's technically outside of the sacred timeline of the MCU. This Spider-Man, this
Mhm.
Peter Parker, is of a different reality, of a different universe. And that wasn't always the plan. When we first heard about this show a number of years ago, it was actually entitled Spider-Man Freshman Year, and they were going to explore really the origins of Peter Parker prior to all of the events that we saw that happened within the MCU portrayed by Tom Holland. So it was just going to
Mhm.
be sort of the animated telling of his origin story and everything that takes place before we sort of meet where he is in Spider-Man Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming. But some of the producers have talked about how limiting that might have been and just how restricting that might have been. And so they decided to pivot and tell a different, unique Spider-Man story that does not take place within the sacred MCU timeline. And so they can just kind of run wild and free with the story and do different things that they haven't really explored before. And so now we're getting this very new story, which basically places Peter Parker in the mentee ship of Norman Osborn, which we know Norman Osborn in the current MCU as we know it doesn't technically exist. And so that's
Right.
also signaling sort of a change in the character and a change of what we've seen out of the Spider-Man character in the MCU so far. And so the first two episodes have debuted on Disney Plus. It's going to be, I believe, a 9-episode first season. And so they're releasing the episodes in batches over the next few weeks. Actually, a 10-episode first season, and they'll ultimately concluded in the middle of February. But got the first two episodes, got a chance to check those out. So I'll pass it to you, man. What did you think about the opening debut episodes of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man?
I'm here for all Spider-Man content, Spider-Man TV shows, Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man video games. I just love Spider-Man. One of my favorite, if not my favorite, superhero out here. So of course I was really excited to check out your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and see what we had here. And I think you mentioning that this is outside of the sacred timeline of the MCU was interesting. It's like, okay, what are we doing? What is this going to look like? What is this thing that we're going to have? And I think for the most part, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man so far has gotten things right. It's not something that's necessarily breaking a ton of new ground, but it's doing things right. And I think a classic Spider-Man story is hard to mess up. But some of the other things they're doing correctly, I think, in this show, beyond Peter Parker himself, is the side characters. They're introducing and putting other characters here that are interesting to this Spider-Man mythos, or somewhat adjacent. For example, Nico, who from Runaways, and she's in oh my god, well, like Midnight Suns. Like, Nico does a lot, and it was so interesting, I think, to see them say, you know what, let's make Nico one of his friends in high school. I was like, oh, okay, we're doing something different for real, for real. I love to see small changes like that, because now it's like, okay, what are we doing with the grander story? And so yeah, man, so far it's fine. I think these episodes are, it was also cool is they have cultural relevancy, which I think is really cool. The cast is very diverse, and not just to be diverse. It's like, no, this makes sense for this character to be here. It makes sense for this character to be here. And even I remember the showrunner was just talking about how, like, we want to make a more accurate portrayal of what New York is. I'm like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Why wouldn't you do that? But I think it's kind of paying off here. So yeah, man, it's been interesting so far. I think it was just 2 episodes. They did feel very introductory, but I think they've already sown some threads, or starting to do things that might shake that might shake up the show. And so I'm hoping some of those things can pay off in the long run. Do I love the animation style? Not really. I don't love it. It's not my favorite animation style. But I think I got used to it, and it's fine as long as they can tell a good story. I'm here for it. Shout out to the voice acting. I had to shout out to my boy Zeno Robinson. He plays Harry in the show. Really cool. To even we haven't seen Harry in a long time, in fact, either. So to see both Harry and Norman be, I think, included here is really dope. And not only just Norman, but Norman, who we like to say the Waves version of him, the black version of Norman Osborn, I think is really cool, I think, to see here. But yeah, man, so far I think it's fine. It's a right now it's like a it's a comfort watch, but I hope they can up the ante and give us a really cool Spider-Man story by the end of it. But so far, I don't have too many complaints. It's just it's okay, but I think it has potential to be even better than okay.
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I was interested in the show. I can't say that I was necessarily excited, but the reality is that Spider-Man and animation on television and or streaming, it's just a mainstay. It's something that's just always been around. We've been getting animated Spider-Man series for the better part of 50 plus years. There's always
Mm-hmm.
typically an animated Spider-Man series on the air in some form or fashion. And so they recently had one that was on the air from, I believe, 2017 to 2020.
Mm.
It was just called Marvel Spider-Man. That ran for about 3 seasons. And so we've gone a couple of years, but it's just one of those pillars that's always going to be on television, similar to Batman over at DC. You're always going to have some sort of rotating animated series that's going to tell a new story, try to do something a little bit different. And so I was interested to see like where they were going to go with this particular iteration of the character and what they were going to do and how they were going to sort of spin it to make it different, since this is technically under the MCU banner. It is being produced by Marvel Studios, and they are trying to tell something somewhat of an adjacent story compared to the Sacred Timeline. And so far, what I've seen out of the first 2 episodes, I think I would say that I'm okay on it. I'm a little
Mm-hmm.
lukewarm on what we've gotten. One of the drawbacks for me so far, I think, just out of the first 2 episodes, it'll likely change because I think it just has to by necessity, is that, to be honest, I think Spider-Man feels like a side character in his own show at this point, because they are
Mm.
focusing on so many of these side characters that they've introduced. We get a lot of introductions, we see a lot of who these people are, but we don't really understand and know this Peter that much as of yet. And I'm just yearning to find out more of that stuff, and I'm just like really curious, like what's going to happen there. And then also, I mean, slight spoiler if you haven't watched it, so I would just say, fast forward about 2 minutes if you don't want to hear anything. But the inciting incident that gives him his powers in this show, it's based on a multiversal incident. We do see Doctor
Mm-hmm.
Strange pop up. He does get bitten by the spider, but what they insinuate here is that his motivation to become Spider-Man is not driven by the death of Uncle Ben in this particular show and in this particular
Mm.
story. It
Mm-hmm.
just kind of
Mm-hmm.
happens, and he just kind of becomes Spider-Man. And that, I don't know if that sits right with me, because I don't know if that's really like the true ethos of who Spider-Man and who Peter Parker is. Like, we historically just know him to be motivated to become this heroic figure because somebody close to him died.
Mm-hmm.
And he decides to become this greater hero, this greater version of himself. And they don't really touch on that here. Like, Uncle Ben has, apparently died, but it's not the driving factor as to why he becomes this
Yeah.
hero in New York
Mm-hmm.
City. And I don't know if they'll address that or if they'll, revisit that in the future, but that's just one of those things where I'm just like, that's a very important attribute to the character that I think is always a constant. If you look at the Across the Spider-Verse movie, the big scenes in that movie where we find out those Nexus events or whatever they they
Mm-hmm.
they refer to
Yeah.
them as,
Mm-hmm.
they're all events in which a Spider-Man or a Spider-Person loses somebody to become this hero. Like, that's just
Right.
consistent. So we've
Mm-hmm.
already sort of established in other media like that's a necessary thing. And so I've yet to see that happen with this Peter Parker. And I'm like, that doesn't really make a ton of sense to me.
Very good point.
Last thing I'll quickly point out, you touched on it. So I wouldn't be true if I didn't call this out, because I also called it out with another show that we reviewed on here, and that was Batman Cape Crusader a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that's some of the representation of the characters. And so there are a lot of diverse characters in the show. They do lean into that. And, on one hand, yes, that is true of New York City. It's one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world. However, Peter Parker is kind of the only white person in this show at this point, and that's just also not realistic to me either. I guess him and Aunt May is
Mm.
also white, but they're like the
Mm-hmm.
only two white
Mm-hmm.
people in this show, and that's just like, that just isn't faithful and true. Like, if we're being
Yeah.
honest, like, come on,
Yeah.
guys, like, we haven't met another white character at all. Everybody is of some culturally diverse background. That doesn't feel real and authentic to me, if I'm being completely honest. It almost kind of feels a little bit like pandering, like we are trying to figure out a placement for every type of person on this show. Because there are
Mm-hmm.
moments where I'm just like, well, why are we talking about this thing like right now? I don't know. It just didn't really make sense to me, in the context of the show and like where we were going, and also the fact that they have now turned, in this universe, Dr. Kirk Connors into a woman, Dr.
Mm.
Carla Connors as
Yeah.
well,
Mm-hmm.
which we
Mm-hmm.
saw a similar thing happen in Batman Cape Crusader, where they made Oswald Cobblepot Oswalda Cobblepot. And I'm just like, Okay. We're doing this gender bending thing again, but why? What's the purpose? They made
Mhm.
her a black woman in this show, and I'm just like, I don't know if I need this. I don't know if it really adds anything to the story. I'll let it play out and see if it does, but I would have a hard time believing that it's actually a meaningful change to the show.
Mhm.
Especially considering we've already had other black characters, like we're making Harry and Norman black as well, essentially in this show. Like,
Mhm.
what are we doing all this for? And I question the motivations behind that stuff a lot. Like, is it truly driven by the narrative of the story and what the story needs, or is it just like, hey guys, we want to kind of check the boxes and make sure that we represent as many culturally diverse groups as we can? And if we're doing it for the latter, I'm not here for that because I don't need that type of shit. Like, I don't need the
Yeah.
pandering and just to be included just for the sake of inclusion. Like, no, we don't need that shit. We can find other stories, find other ways to get those types of stories told. So I'll continue to let it play out and see how it goes over the next few episodes. But it's one of those things where I'm just like, I don't know, it feels a little forced to me, if
Mhm.
I'm being honest. But those are the big drawbacks so far at this moment. But beyond that, it's fine. I'll continue to see what it looks like. I don't think it's going to live up to the expectations of an X-Men 97.
Oh, no.
But if it could be a serviceable Spider-Man story, something that's unique and can provide us a different window into the character, especially also with the other supporting characters like Harry and Norman, if they can do some cool stuff with that, then I think
Mhm.
it'll be okay. But it's also, it's one of those things that they've already committed to for at least 2 seasons, and potentially
Wow.
even a third season. So it might be around for a while here, and we'll continue to see the story play out. But we'll ultimately have to see as we get through season one. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the debut episodes of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man on Disney Plus. If you've checked out these first 2 episodes, hit us up and let us know what you think about them.